But yeah, let's move on. Do you want to move on to Texas?
Yeah, we got to do this. How to frame it? I mean, Greg Abbott and his cronies and monsters here have put forward and signed into law a monstrous anti-abortion bill, and I know people have seen it. It's been big national news. Um, it bans abortion after 6 weeks, which essentially is a virtual ban on abortion because you'd only have to really be 2 weeks out from a missed period, to hit that deadline. And then, of course, it's not very easy in a lot of parts of the state to schedule an abortion appointment anyway. I mean, it's very much set up to virtually ban abortion. And in another really disgusting and as we were talking about with Brandon earlier, revealing moment of how Republicans understand power. The way that it's set up, the enforcement of it is really nasty. Where instead of the state enforcing it, basically it allows private citizens to sue abortion providers, and I believe also women themselves who get an abortion past that deadline, which means that your nosy neighbor, your incredibly insane evangelical vigilante, is going to be not only encouraged but emboldened and relied upon by the state,
Deputized.
to deputize, essentially, to go back to another horrible tradition, to abuse women, to abuse abortion providers. And it's a sneaky legal move because it makes it harder for abortion clinics and pro-choice organizations to sue, because you can't sue the attorney general because he's not the one bringing the suits against people, right? It just is meant, it's a very sneaky way to try to get around any kind of legal protections or legal battle around this. So this won't go into effect until September. And notably, the Supreme Court is going to be hearing another case on, I believe, Mississippi's abortion law before then, which a lot of people are worried with the new majority could actually overturn Roe v. Wade. It's one of the, I want to make a couple points about the Texas legislature because unfortunately this is not the only horrible thing that's happened this week. But I want to say on this issue, there's no doubt about it. This is a war on women, and it's particularly a war on poor and working people. There's no doubts about it. The fight to control people's rights over their own body is not just, an evangelical Christian crusade, but it's also an attempt to discipline and to control people in the nastiest way. It's evil, and it absolutely needs to be confronted. And I know people are already, laying the groundwork to fight against this. But it just, as we were saying with Brandon, all of these things have just been suspended for so long that it's only a matter of time. And we're seeing this across the South now and across the country with GOP places with GOP majorities, that they really are finally coalescing on like a very, very strong push to overturn basic fundamental human rights. It's a reminder that this isn't a game. And I think obviously we should direct most of our anger on this one towards the GOP. But in states like Texas, I think where the Democratic Party completely bungled the most recent elections, we should also remind people that these things, these fights, these political fights are very, very important. And for fuck's sake, we can't leave the opposition's hands in the Democratic Party, which is constantly showing that it's going to fail time and time again.
Yeah, I don't really have a whole lot to say on that. Besides, I imagine Texas is a lot like North Dakota, which is that these providers are few and far between. I think North Dakota only has a single clinic in the entire state, and that it's constantly harassed by these type of people who would love to be able to sue a woman for going in there and terminating a pregnancy she didn't want. And yeah, it's I don't know. It's very gross.
Yeah, it's absolutely gross. And I want to add some more stuff, just sort of rapid fire, because for people who aren't familiar, Texas legislature is like extremely limited in the amount of time that it meets. So they're pushing through a lot of stuff right now. It's a really important political time when there's a lot that needs to get done. And you have stuff like this, which is, nasty, war on women and war on working people. but also just like a lot of crap. We have the critical race theory nonsense that's going through, another bill trying to push to force like any sports team to play the national anthem. A lot of crap and red meat for their base. But I wanted to note that one, Texas has now joined 21 other states in rejecting extensions on unemployment benefits for people affected by COVID. This is not just a Texas problem. This is a problem of the GOP across the country. And it's one, they do this because they are the hammer of pro-business and anti-worker statutes, oftentimes aided very happily by the Democratic Party. But I also wanted to point out that this is exactly what happens when you have an American media that for the past month has been telling this nonsense story about a worker shortage, which everybody knows the line at this point, it fundamentally is a wage shortage, right? But when you start to let that percolate in the media, right? And it's an ideological battle there because you start to convince even working people that this is a problem, right? People who just follow the news casually, like, oh, this is a problem. We can't get anyone to work, right?
Yeah, people see it in the news and then they drive up to one drive-through that has the sign that says, sorry, we can't get workers. And then all of a sudden you create this impression like, oh, the government's actually being, I mean, theoretically the government's being too generous to people and they're coerced to work, basically.
Yeah, you're coerced to work. Yeah, it's exactly. It's trying to break and discipline labor. So screw all the media organizations that were just unthinkingly eating up pro-business propaganda over the past few weeks. I mean, this is a victory here for really, really nasty, organizations like the Chamber of Commerce that has been waging a war on these very, very meager benefits in the first place. People have been making the note that on top of, as Abbott is doing that, Texas is also extending Chapter 313, which gives corporations huge property tax breaks, including that jackass Elon Musk, who doesn't give a shit about Texas, by the way, other than a place that he thinks that you guys are rubes and you will give him millions of dollars to do whatever he wants, right? So you're not attracting innovation to this state. You're attracting exploiters like Musk. So we have that crap, and then we're not really going to get anything done on the power grid after the snowstorm, right?
Which, how many people died? Like, do we have like
I don't know off the top of my head, but it's devastating. But we also have that, and pushes to ban cities' ability to block, to renegotiate or reimagine their power grids so that they're not so reliant on natural gas. I just wanted to, if you can, pull this tweet up at the Dr. Buckingham tweet, because this is another example of what I mean when I talk about the Democratic Party. This is 28-3 in the Senate, which means you got Democrats standing with Republicans on this to ban homeless camping across the state of Texas. So this is, the big fight in Austin over Prop B. This is now a statewide ban on this. And this is just an interesting thing here. And I just think it's so cynical and disgusting. It needs to be noted that in this tweet, the author of this horrible anti-human bill uses like the PC language around, homeless folk, saying, what is it? Those experiencing homelessness. And I just think that that's just so disgusting and cynical to be like, oh, I'm going to use the correct framing about this while I'm actively harming people. Another really nasty thing that we talked about with Brandon a second ago is that they're going to allow, in the House, they voted to allow police to use drones, allow drone strikes against people, right? In the backdrop of, Black Lives Matter and all these conversations about police abuse, giving the police another weapon, and literally at this point, a weapon of war.
There's got to be, if some Texas-based journalists can look into, there's got to be some money behind that, right? The unanimity, like some drone manufacturer, because that's Texas police departments are going to get drones. Like that's big contracts and training and shit like that. Like I'd be curious, but I mean, who knows? Our political class is dumb enough to, I guess, okay that anyway. But it seems like that seems like a lot of money. Also,
people are afraid, especially Democrats, of seeming like they're anti-police because they're cowards and they have no backbone and they don't recognize what's happening with social and political movements, right? And they think that they're just going to get voters because the Republicans are so horrifying without giving people anything to vote for, right? The story of 2020, again, I always have to note this so people don't mistake this. Biden still won, huge majorities with, the Black and Hispanic population here, but Trump ate into those big time, which means that a lot of people, again, it's not the shift. We're not talking about 50-50. We're talking about moving from like 90 to 75%, support in these communities for the Democratic Party. But these are stories that are very, very notable. So despite all the horrible shit that Trump was doing, the fact that the Democratic Party in this state was unable to, maintain their majorities there is an example of a party that is just completely out of touch and has no real roots with its base, and is so drunk on this ideology that they just, because of divine providence, are going to maintain voters with people, maintain votes and support from communities of color in the United States. It's something that just needs to be challenged left and right, because this has severe consequences. This kind of stupid political strategy and lack of coherent platforms, it has extremely damaging consequences. But the last point, and I'm curious what you think about this one, I think you probably agree with me, is look, whatever kind of rhetoric you feel like is helpful to get the points across about how bad all this stuff that's happening is, I think use it. I'm not one of these people who's like, oh, don't make this kind of argument. But I just want to say, as like a political point, as a theoretical point, that saying that, oh, how insane is it that Abbott is, blocking welfare programs for workers while giving corporations huge amounts of money. Oh, isn't this hypocrisy? Or what happened to like the logic of small government when, the Texas legislature and all of these Republicans are essentially, blocking local governments from doing what they want or voting on their own measures, right? They don't care. Because conservatism is not a coherent ideology. Conservatism is an excuse to be the hammer of pro-business, anti-working class, and extremely reactionary social groups, to be their warrior. Conservatism is the excuse that you give to the public to try to make it seem like you don't just straight up have blood on your hands, that you're not just running on destroying people's lives and their livelihoods, right? We need to understand as the left, right, as socialists, that this is not an ideology that you can really pick apart, right, theoretically, because it's not it's not like a functional theoretical view of the world. It's a lie that's being sold to a lot of people, and it gets popular when you have an absence of popular movements that show people that we're going to fight for working people, we're going to fight for you and fight for your communities. Of course, what's going to fill up that empty space is a bunch of nonsense and people holding on to some of the more reactionary positions, like being, against abortion and things like that, right? If you don't give people something else, right, you leave a huge hole, an opportunity for our opponents to weave completely incoherent narratives, but narratives that might convince somebody to show up and vote for them, right? And, we just need to understand that conservatism is not a coherent ideology as socialists, and the Democratic Party sure as hell is not going to save us. And understand that we can't just sit these fights out, because they're very, very critical and they affect a lot of people.
Yeah, I mean, basically the conservatives, like you said, the hammer, or like absolutely labor needs to be coerced, and the Democrats are basically, well, we agree about that, but we're going to try to do it with, instead, it's the carrot versus the stick, right?
Yeah.
Basically, right? The Democrats are the carrot, Republicans are the stick, and try to get them both working if people are going to take your drive-through order.
And like, sorry. And I think, we sort of said all we need to say about this, but just like a little bit of free political advice to Biden and the Democratic Party as a whole. As the Republicans wage war on these unemployment benefits, why don't you make the point that most people actually like getting a little bit of extra money when they need it, right? And own that stuff, instead of, what did we get from Biden when this kind of story came out about the unemployment benefits? Was walking back and basically accepting all of the right-wing talking points and trying to make excuses about how it's not fitting reality, instead of saying, no, I'm somebody who is very happy to be putting money in Americans' pockets when they need it, right? The inability of the Democrats to do that kind of positive politics only allows the Republicans to be able to push whatever kind of nonsense narrative that they want. And again, Biden's not going to do that, because Biden doesn't want functionally to stand for that kind of material shift in people's politics. But it's just an example that the political calculus is actually very, very simple, and the fact that the Democratic Party doesn't do it is absolute travesty and harms working people across the board.
Yeah, and it gives Republicans things to run on. I mean, not that like any of the Republicans that are fainting as class traitors somehow have stepped up in any way on this moment. They're all in support of beating people back into the workplace.
Howley and
it's and Biden having Psaki go out and say, though this was only supposed to be for COVID, and we're going to work with governors. It's like, no, we should be like, I dream of a time where like a fucking Democrat says, that all those articles that came out about how people don't only have $400 or barely even $400 for an emergency. That's no longer a thing anymore. That's not even a thing that everyone has thousands of dollars that they're sitting on. And absolutely the shit would fall apart in this country. I think it requires like, I think there are a certain amount of these service industry jobs that have been exploiting people who are absolutely need that shit. And if they don't need that shit, it's going to be hard to get people to come service you like that.
Dude, I mean, it's like, remember when there was all this hand-wringing about Trump wanting to sign the first stimulus checks, right? And people don't realize that was a very, very astute move by Trump. When you interviewed people in a lot of like the recaps of the election, why was Trump able to win support from kind of working class communities of color? One of the number one reasons was that guy sent me money and I needed some money, right? And instead of like what the Democrats did is they freaked out. It's like, oh my God, he can't do that, he can't do that. And then come into power. And then instead of saying like, oh, we're going to own all of the positive benefits of this program, and we're going to extend the benefits to $2,000, which they failed to do. You get all this kind of hand-wringing. Look, they might have implemented the extension on the payments, under Trump, but say that you're the one who actually like really supports it, or the reason it's still existing for people. Own it and win on it. And they don't do that nationally, and they sure as hell don't do that statewide here, which is a disaster.
Yeah, I'm looking for, but I got the letter from Joe because he did send a letter saying taking credit for it, but the letter was like, it like did the math for you, saying like, so in addition to the $600 you got in December, this completes my promise. Like, that's not like, if you're having to explain that shit, that's not a victory lap, man. It should have been like, we actually exceeded the promise and we gave you $2,600 when we could have only done this cheap ass thing that gave you $1,400, but here's an extra $600 that right, they could have easily done that, and instead they didn't, because again, they are concerned about the business owners that are saying like, I can't get a dishwasher to come take the same fucking wage that they were taking a year and a half ago, to come and like, or even like retail employees, like the mask thing. Like it's infinitely more objectionable to me for a person to come into a retail establishment and ask the worker why they're wearing a mask than why they aren't. But either one of those scenarios is that worker having to put up with extra shit like that they probably don't want to. Because as a person who worked at Old Navy, I can't imagine how much of a fucking disaster it would be to work Old Navy when this mask stuff is in flux, right? And I don't really know where I'm going with this, but exasperating.
Yeah, it is. It's exasperating and exhausting.